Hi, everyone, and welcome to the lineup. Today is February the 2nd, 2023. I'm Barry Stagner. Glad to have you with us this evening or morning, whenever it is where you live. And just wanted to say thanks to all who came and watched and prayed for proximity. It was just an amazing day. So very thankful for our dear friends, Amir Sarfati, Pastor Michael Lay, and of course, Jan Markell. So great to have Jan kind of oversee our little current event update time, and had a lot of feedback about that, and very grateful for these dear friends to come together and talk about something that most of us are passionate about, and that is the proximity to the coming of the Lord. Now, we certainly know we don't know the day or the hour, but Jesus gave a very detailed and specific answer as to what the generation that's going to see it is going to look like and what they'll be experiencing and what will be happening in the world. And we focus on those things of proximity as we do every year. And again, just hey, thanks for all the prayers and just for those who are curious, Amir is back home and resting. He had quite a long journey to get home. Took him some 36 hours, but there's tired and then there's a good tired. And we both got back from the Philippines with a good tired, and now he is home back in the looking over Armageddon and all the wonderful things that Israel has to share with us in thought and sight. And so appreciate your prayers for all of us. Talked to Pastor Michael Lay. He's back home as well. Jan was very blessed by the conference and able to join us, being able to join us. So again, we all both covet and appreciate your prayers greatly. And, we've got a great lineup for us tonight of stories regarding Bible prophecy. And, there's so many things that happen in these last days. It's hard to really sift through and condense things down to a specific set of stories as they relate to the prophecies that are recorded in the Word. And, again, just thinking about all the things that are going on and how the Bible is just dialing things in. And we had Amir and I had a little sit down Sunday night at our home church, Calvary Chapel, Tustin, and just talked about all the things happening in the world. And one of the things that, I mentioned at the outset was, I look at Bible prophecy and the study of it kind of like a funnel. If you were to drop a ball down a funnel, funnel at the top is much wider and the ball would circulate and slower and slower. And then as it dropped down toward the bottom of the cone, it would increase in speed and then finally down to the very bottom where the ball would drop out. And that's kind of what we're seeing now. We're seeing this escalation of things happening, some of the things happening with nations named in the Ezekiel war scenario are in the news, even though the story that Ezekiel or these nations have invaded Israel is yet to break, and but could break, I believe, preceded by the destruction of Damascus, which is always in the news as well. The global events related to geological and atmospheric situations that are going to be happening in an escalating fashion. They're all over the news. Antarctica breaking, since records have been kept, a record of cold for the month of January, and tornadoes all over Europe. We've got flooding in some areas. California has just seen massive rain. Just went through another 2-day storm here at the beginning of the week. And there's all these extremes that are happening, and that's exactly what we would expect to see at the time that precedes the tribulation period. We would expect to see unprecedented events. And, last night, Wednesday evening, I don't know if anybody got to see it. I believe it was more visible down in South America, but there was a comet that passed by, and green in color and visible with the naked eye. And its trajectory is like every 50,000 year orbit. And so, again, just something specific to this generation that I believe things like that are a reminder of what's going to happen during the tribulation. But we're seeing really just an advancement of everything related to Bible prophecy, which ought to remind us to keep looking up. Our redemption is nigh. In the midst of all the goofball things and mess that our country is in. And, it's funny, my son sent me a little clip of the governor of California talking about how clean and sober is the phrase clean and sober is just such like a blight, and almost he implied that it's just unfair to force a saying like that on society. And he made mention and stated, he said, after mentioning he has a cup of wine as he watches the news at night, he said all of us need to self-medicate at one time or another. And what a heinous thing to say. The Bible has given us uh, plenty of information to make it through these last days. And we've not been given the spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. And no, we don't need to self medicate. We have the Lord, and thus we have the mind of Christ. And these minds don't need self medication. So, again, just seems like just everything, the delusional thinking, the deception, the mass defection from truth that the Bible predicts within the last days. It's all happening, and just be encouraged. Everything that was prophesied about Jesus' first coming came to pass, and everything that is prophesied about a second coming is going to come to pass as well, as is everything that is prophesied regarding the rapture of the church. Someday we're going to put on immortal incorruptibility in a moment and the twinkling of an eye and forever be with the Lord. And these corruptible bodies, according to Paul in 1 Corinthians 15, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, we must put on incorruption because these perishable bodies cannot inherit and exist eternally. So we've got a major upgrade coming. And for those of you who may be getting older like I am and finding your body doesn't operate the way it used to, or maybe you've got an infirmity or a malady of some sort or a physical deformity that you wish wasn't part of your life, someday we're getting a new model and they're going to be perfect. And Philippians 3:20 tells us that we're going to be in a body model that is like the glorious body of Jesus. And to that, all I can say is even so, come quickly. So let's get on to our stories. And thank you again for all your prayers on both our trip to the Philippines and proximity. The Associated French Press is reporting that Moscow warns Israel that supplying Ukraine with arms will escalate the conflict. Russia warned Israel on Wednesday against supplying weapons to Ukraine after Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said he was considering military aid for Kiev and was willing to mediate in the conflict. We say that all countries that supply weapons to Ukraine should understand that we will consider these weapons to be legitimate targets for Russia's armed forces, Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharov told reporters. The Kremlin has warned of an escalation in the conflict as Ukraine's Western partners vow to supply more weapons to Kiev. Any attempts, implemented or even unrealized, but announced for the supply of additional new or some other weapons will lead to an escalation of this crisis, and everyone should be aware of this, Zakharov said. And in an interview aired on Tuesday, Netanyahu said he was looking into providing Kiev with other kinds of aid besides humanitarian help, amid concerns over Israel's complex relationship with Russia and its need to retain freedom of action in Syria in its effort to keep Iran in check. Washington and Berlin this month said they would supply Kiev with modern tanks, but Ukraine is also asking its backers for fighter jets and long-range artillery. The warning from Moscow also comes after reports in recent weeks that Israel has refused requests from the U.S. to hand over 10 Hawk anti-aircraft batteries and hundreds of interceptor missiles for delivery to Ukraine. However, the New York Times reported last month that the U.S. military was quietly shipping hundreds of thousands of artillery shells to Ukraine from a massive stockpile it stores in Israel. And Israel has resisted providing weapons to Ukraine since the start of Russia's invasion. And one major reason for Israel's hesitation appears to be its strategic need to maintain freedom of operations in Syria, where Russian forces largely control the airspace. And the issue has been strained ties between Jerusalem and Kiev as the Ukrainians have consistently pressed Israel to provide more defense aid. The Ukrainian ambassador earlier this month urged Israel to supply his country with missile defense systems, in the wake of continued deadly Russian strikes. And Reuters reports that Ukraine's new weapon will force a Russian shift, and the U.S. has answered President Volodymyr Zelensky's plea for rockets that can strike deep behind the front lines of the nearly year-long conflict with Russia. Now, Russian forces will have to adapt or face potentially catastrophic losses. The new weapon, the ground launched small diameter bomb, or the GLSDB, will allow Ukraine's military to hit targets at twice the distance reachable by the rockets it now fires from the U.S. supplied high mobility artillery rocket system, or HIMARS. If included as expected in an upcoming weapons aid package, and the 151-kilometer or 94-mile GLSDB will put all of Russia's supply lines in the east of the country within reach, as well as part of Russian-occupied Crimea. This will force Russia to move its supplies even farther from the front lines, making its soldiers more vulnerable and greatly complicating plans for any new offensive. This could slow down a Russian assault significantly, said Andriy Zagarnodyuk, Ukraine's defense minister, just as HIMARS significantly influence the course of events. These rockets could influence the course of events even more. The GLSDB is a GPS-guided bomb that can maneuver to hit hard-to-reach targets, such as command centers. It's a smart bomb or smart missile, if you will. They are currently unable to reach much Russian military facilities more than 80 kilometers away, according to Ukrainian military analyst Alexander Musayenko. If we can reach them practically all the way to the Russian border in occupied Crimea, then of course this will lower the attacking potential of Russian forces. So again, pairing these first two stories together, who knows what Russia's response is going to be. We've heard a lot of bloviating in the past from Putin, and threats and all the other things that he's been doing and saying along the way about NATO getting involved and the other issues with countries in close proximity, housing soldiers or weapons or missile defense systems. And so, you never know when you've got somebody backed into a corner. That's when odd things begin to happen or knee-jerk reactions can happen. And this, again, is just a very possible escalation of events and Israel's involvement. We know there's going to be a hook in the jaw that draws down the invading nations from the north into Israel. And we know certainly there'll be some economic motivation behind that, because that's what Ezekiel 38 and 39 says, because the protesting nations ask what's the motive behind this invasion. Is it to take plunder and booty? And so certainly, there is something economic, but who knows what the hook is going to be? The hook in the jaw, could very well be Russia saying, you know what, you're thwarting our efforts to control this area that we see to be rightfully ours as part of Russia or Mother Russia. And, again, we don't know. But what we do know is that all the players are on the board, so to speak, or another euphemism, all the kids are in the pool. And so interesting to watch these things happen. And the Gateway Pundit also gives us another story about a reaction from the Kremlin regarding the U.S. and German decision of late. The Kremlin offers cash bounties for burning U.S. and NATO tanks in Ukraine. Russian politicians and companies offer rewards for burning, capturing, or destroying NATO tanks in Ukraine. The declaration was made after the U.S. and Germany announced they would be sending tanks to Ukraine. The Biden administration announced 31 Abrams tanks would be sent to Ukraine. Germany announced it would send 14 Leopard tanks to Ukraine in the coming months. Russian soldiers will be paid up to $21,450 for the capture of a U.S. Abrams tank and $7,150 for its destruction. Well, why would they want to pay more for the capture? Well, they want to see the technology. Cash bounties offered by Russian businesses and officials for the destruction of Western military equipment in Ukraine will inevitably lead to more enthusiasts willing to undertake the task. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov predicted on Wednesday, and he noted that although heavy Western tanks such as the Leopard 2 and M1 Abrams have yet to be delivered to Kiev's forces, such proposals demonstrated the unity and the desire of all to contribute to reaching the goals of Russia's ongoing military operation in Ukraine. Last week, Berlin announced it would supply Kiev with 14 Leopards and allow other European countries to export their own stocks to Ukraine. amounting to a total of 112 tanks. Washington, meanwhile, has pledged the 31 Abrams, but doesn't expect to deliver them until late 2023. Well, again, a lot of this is posturing, political posturing, saying we're going to send it. Now, why would we wait until 10, 11 months from now to send those tanks over? They may never actually be headed there. It may just be positioning politically because 10 months from now is who knows what's going to be going on over there as this battle continues, this invasion continues to destroy Ukrainian lives and property. And, just again, wars and rumors of wars comes to mind. The Jerusalem Post is reporting that Israel targeting Iranian arms flow to Ukraine. Netanyahu says we are attacking not only Iran's nuclear program, but we're also taking action against certain weapons. And Iran invariably exports them. Israel is targeting the production of Iranian weapons that could be sent to Russia for use against Ukraine, according to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in an interview airing last Wednesday or yesterday. Israel acts in ways that I will not itemize here against Iran's weapons productions, which are used against Ukraine, Netanyahu said. Israel has already been active in working to thwart Iran's ability to develop nuclear weapons, but in this interview, he said that such efforts were also directed toward preventing the flow of Iranian weapons to Russia. We are attacking not only Iran's nuclear program, a nation named in the Ezekiel invasion, but also taking action against certain weapons development that Iran has, and Iran invariably exports them. Netanyahu spoke days after the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times reported that Israel was behind an explosion at a weapons depot in the Iranian city of Isfahan, known to be a place where Iran has enriched uranium. It has been unclear if the target of the explosion was Iran's nuclear program, its missiles, or its armed drone program. Iran sends both missiles and armed drones to Moscow, and Israel, as its policy in such instances, has not confirmed or denied the report. Netanyahu told reporters, I will never talk about specific operations, but every time some explosion takes place in the Middle East, Israel is blamed or given responsibility. Sometimes we are, sometimes we're not, Netanyahu went on to say. Now, looking at this Iranian situation, and again, you've got Russia named in the Ezekiel invasion, Russia and Israel now sharing a news story regarding weapons, a potential hook in the jaw, as I mentioned a moment ago. Now we've got the Iranians who've been exporting drones to Russia for the purpose of using them against Ukraine, and now Israel is acting on behalf of the Ukrainians indirectly by blasting this drone manufacturing facility in Iran, and it was one of the targets. And, thinking about all the things we've been watching and following through the news, we know that Israel has often said, Netanyahu has made no bones about the fact the U.S. administrations have stated that Iran is not going to get a nuclear weapon. And the Times of Israel reports that the Nuclear Monitor says Iran made furtive changes to Fordo centrifuges. The UN nuclear watchdog said Wednesday that Iran has substantially modified an interconnection between two centrifuge clusters, enriching uranium to up to 60% at its Fordo fuel enrichment plant without declaring it to the agency. And during an unannounced inspection at the Fordo plant on January 21, the International Atomic Energy Agency detected that two IR6 centrifuge cascades were interconnected in a way that was substantially different from the mode of operation declared by Iran to the agency, according to the confidential report seen by the Associated French Press. Since late last year, the two centrifuge cascades have been used to produce uranium enriched up to 60%, the report to the member states added. After the IAEI carried out the inspection at Fordo, Iran subsequently informed the agency that it had switched to this mode of operation on 16th of January. The agency did not specify what changes were made to the interconnection between the centrifuge cascades. Maybe you've seen pictures of these centrifuges. They're big, tall, thin, stainless steel looking cylinders, and they look like they're 4 or 5 feet high. And what they do is in the enrichment of uranium process, uranium has two isotopes. It has U-238 and U-235. And U-235 is what's called fissile. In other words, it can be split, and therefore the energy being released. And the U-238 is non-fissile. And the U-238 is the heavier of the two isotopes. So these cylinders actually are, swirl the uranium, and the heavier material, like with any process like that, is going to move to the outside. And then the center, where the U-235 is concentrated, it is sucked out of there and then put in a centrifuge, this chain to the one next to it. And then that process repeats itself until it continues to refine where the concentration is heavy enough at 60% U-235 versus U-238. Then that's considered something that can be made into at least some type of nuclear device. Weapons grade is actually 90%. But, the Iranians, in the midst of all this negotiation with the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action that Trump pulled out of under his administration, they continued to buy advanced centrifuges. And what exactly this change was, obviously was a matter of concern. Otherwise, the IAEI never would have brought it up. But rest assured, it has to do with speeding up the process. And that's what these advanced centrifuges do. They speed up the ability for this U-238 and U-235 to be separated. And they're, obviously called advanced centrifuges, advanced technologically. So, again, the goal of the Iranian regime is to have a nuclear weapon. And the target of that nuclear weapon, they have stated quite clearly, is going to be Israel. Now, they do want to destroy the great Satan, which they call the United States, and the little Satan, which they call Israel. But, the real target is the hatred of the Jews and the desire to wipe them out. So, again, all the things that they've said time and time again about, our aspirations, nuclear aspirations, are strictly peaceful. These are energy related. And listen, energy grade, yes, they separate U-238 from U-235 for energy usage as well. But the concentration of U-235 to make energy is 20% enrichment, not 60%. 60% has no other usage other than dirty bomb type application, and the concentration of fissile material is sufficient enough to create some type of explosive device. And if you want to get down to putting something that's small enough to fit on a nuclear warhead, there you're talking about the 90% concentration rate. So again, over and over and over, oh no, we're wanting to create nuclear energy and all that. Well, there's no reason to exceed, because the process obviously is very costly, and to enrich uranium and these chains of cascades of centrifuges, each of which are very expensive. And, there's just no reason for it if all you're concerned about is energy grade uranium. So again, who knows what's going to be the catalyst for what launches this Ezekiel invasion. And, I've talked many times, many of you have probably heard Amir and I discuss the fact that we believe that the proverbial straw that breaks the camel's back and launches the Ezekiel invasion will be the destruction of Damascus. And that standalone scripture, Isaiah 17:1, just says Damascus will cease from being a city. And that means exactly that. It will cease from being a city. This wasn't fulfilled by Sennacherib in the 7th century BC, because Damascus stands today. And when the Bible says cease, that means it will no longer be inhabitable. It will cease to exist as an inhabitable city. So something is coming, and that could very well be the catalyst to the launching the Ezekiel invasion, the frustration or pair that with the frustration of the actions of Israel in, supporting Ukraine, even though it's indirectly, and all these other things that have led to Putin's stance and the posture of the Kremlin regarding supplying munitions and weaponry to Ukraine. And I say all these things for this reason. We are so close. I mean, you know how quickly things can change. Look how quickly, especially you here in the States, September 11th, 2001, everything changed for us. And it changed in just a couple hours. And our country was different. It's been different ever since. So, you know, things can move quickly to the next level. And I believe that that's what's going to happen in the not too distant future. We're going to get up one day and it's going to be that day, that moment and twinkling of an eye day. And all these things are going to be not just progressing, then they'll start actualizing. They'll become realities and prophecy will be fulfilled. And, you know, it's interesting, you know, looking back over the life and ministry of Jesus, you know, at the birth of Jesus, there were like 300 prophecies fulfilled, many have estimated. And, you know, there are a multitude of prophecies concerning the second coming, but these messianic prophecies are fulfilled in compact periods of time. And, you know, we're living in one of those, I believe, compact periods of time where the tribulation is going to be ended by the second coming. And we need to remember that the rapture of the church and the second coming are two different things, and they're minimum 7 years apart. Probably a little more than that. I think that after the rapture of the church, it's going to take some time for the world to reorganize, and also for one guy to come up from somewhere from the revived Roman Empire and say, I've got a plan. And it starts with a contract with Israel. The word translated as covenant in Daniel 9 can mean a contract as well. And this is exactly what's going to happen, but it may take some time. So again, just watching all these things take place, what a privileged time we are living in today as Christians. Think about how many Christians live without Jews in Jerusalem, without any nation of Israel. And yet here, Ezekiel 37, Jeremiah talked about the return of the Jews. Amos talked about the return of the Jews being brought back into the land. And now here we are being the generation that has seen this come to pass. And the Lord's coming quickly. And the reason I think it's important for us to consider these things is so that we're motivated to tell other people about Jesus. And because what's coming upon the world, Jesus himself said, if I didn't come back and stop it, nobody'd live through it. He'd kill everybody on the planet if he didn't stop the tribulation period. So, and it's a literal hell on earth during those 7 years, that 70th week of Daniel. And so we need to be telling people that there is a way to escape eternal judgment, and there is a way to escape the temporal judgment that is coming upon the whole world. And that way for both of those things, the escape path for both of those things is the blood of Jesus and being born again. So again, you know, I was thinking about the fact that especially having been in the Philippines, and now we've got a couple of these revealing revelation conferences under our belt. One was 2 sessions Friday night and 5 on Saturday. The other was just 5 on Saturday, where we taught the whole book of Revelation. And, you know, it really struck me, why would God go into such great detail about, in the Bible, about a time period where the church isn't going to be present on the earth? Why would he want us to know so much about these books? And why would he bookend this particular book with a promise to the reader and the keeper of those things? The word keep used in Revelation 1:3 talks about guarding from loss or injury, the Greek word tereo. So, you know, why would he want us to know what's coming? Well, so we can tell people how to avoid it. I mean, that's the whole purpose for that information for us, because we're not going to be here to say, hey, this is this passage, this is that passage. But we are here to warn people that this is coming. And just what an incredible responsibility and privilege to serve the Lord in times such as these. Now, we've got some other things happening outside the war and rumors of war category. And the Jewish News Syndicate is reporting that there's an Israeli delegation in Sudan to finalize expanding the Abraham Accords. In Khartoum, oh, goodness, here we go with that again. Still, this just hits me once in a while. It's just so kooky, this whole jet lag thing. But it hits me about this time of day, and then usually around 7:30 at night. But Khartoum reportedly intends to take a significant step regarding relations between the two countries. Sudan is reportedly ready to finalize its move to join the Abraham Accords as an Israeli delegation headed by Minister of Foreign Affairs Eli Cohen met with the country's ruler Abdel Fattah al-Burhan in Khartoum on Thursday, according to Hebrew and Arab media. Israel's foreign ministry would not confirm that Cohen was in Sudan, only issuing a statement that he was heading an Israeli delegation and would hold a press conference upon his return from a historic state trip at Ben Gurion Airport on Thursday evening. However, Reuters reported that an Israeli delegation arrived in the Sudanese capital to discuss the normalization of ties between the two countries, citing two Sudanese government sources. Now, this is interesting because Sudan is one of the named nations that is going to join the invading forces along with Turkey, Russia, and Iran and Libya when that hook in the jaw is put in their mouth. Now, again, note we do have Sudan and Southern Sudan, and they are indeed recognized distinct sovereign nations. But, Sudan is a Muslim nation again, and we know that one of the common features amongst them, besides the economic commonality, is that most of the nations, 4 out of the 5 nations named in the Ezekiel invasion, are Muslim nations. So, there is going to be the joining of forces with these other 4 nations. The only one that is not predominantly Muslim, even though there are quite a large number of Muslims in Russia. The others are all radical Islamic nations. And so what's going to happen with this, we don't know. But we do know that this move toward peace is going to be broken. And we know that Zechariah 12:3 says that all nations are going to be anti-Israeli during the tribulation period. So, but, again, this reminds us of what Paul talked about in 1 Thessalonians. Sorry. When they say peace and safety, sudden destruction is going to come upon them. The article says the UAE, Bahrain, and Morocco have also signed on to the accords, and Sudan first agreed to normalize relations with Israel in October 2020 on the condition of being removed from the U.S. list of state sponsors of terrorism. Then U.S. President Donald Trump agreed to the stipulation. The process was completed last month, Reuters reported. So again, there's a motivation behind it and not just a recognition that the Jews have every right to the land, but it was being removed from all the consequences of being recognized as a state sponsor of terror. And the Al Jamaina reports that Chad is opening an embassy in Israel 5 years after renewing ties. And there were pictures scattered around on various Israeli media outlets about that very thing happening today. And Chadian President Mohammed Deby said he would inaugurate the embassy in Israel on Thursday that would build bilateral relations that were established 5 years ago. And Deby announced the plan on Wednesday as he began a visit to Israel. An Israeli official said the Muslim-majority African country's embassy would be in the Tel Aviv area. This is a country laden with history, and this land, gosh, I'm so sorry, this land of civilization of all monotheistic faiths. Deby, I slept great last night too. Isn't that crazy? Deby told Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in a video statement. So again, overtures are being made towards Israel from predominantly Muslim countries. And, looking at these things points us to what we just mentioned a moment ago, that the world's cry prior to the tribulation is going to be peace and safety. This will be the mantra of the world before the sudden destruction comes upon them. Now, I want to move into a new section of our time together tonight and just consider some of the things going on in Christendom and with the church. And, there's something developing here that I think is worthy of mention. And I want to point it out here in a second, but let me first read a couple of stories. Christian Headlines reports that a library rejects a church's Christian-themed story hour and faces a possible lawsuit. An Arizona Public Library violated the U.S. Constitution and its own policy when it refused to allow a local citizen to reserve space for a church-sponsored Christian-themed story hour, according to the man's legal representative. Pinal County resident and citizen Ricardo Frias made the request in December to Santan Library, telling officials He wanted to hold a story hour to read one of a series of brave books, which he said would illustrate a moral principle aligned with the Bible, according to First Liberty Institute, which is representing him. The story hour would be hosted by Calvary Chapel of Queen Creek and open to the public. Friars told library officials in his book that his book was Christian themed and Bible based. Library officials, though, declined Frea's request, telling him that because the building is county owned, we have to be careful about the separation of church and state, which, by the way, is not in the Declaration of Independence, is not in the Constitution, and is not in the Bill of Rights. That's something that's been implied that isn't actually present. The only one restricted in the First Amendment of the Constitution is Congress. Congress shall pass no law regarding the limitation of the church's ability to act within society, and that's a paraphrase, and the state. And we aren't allowed to offer the space for church or religious activities that could be considered preaching, according to First Liberty. First Liberty says the library is violating its own policy, which states we welcome and allow nonprofit organizations and community groups to use conference rooms when those facilities are not needed for administrative use, activities, or programs sponsored in whole or in part by the county. And the library is also violating Supreme Court precedent and the U.S. Constitution, First Liberty says. First Liberty sent a letter dated January 30th to the Pinal County Boards of Supervisors. If Pinal County continues to deny him access to the Santan Library, we will take legal action, the letter said. Brave Books, a faith-based publisher, says it wants to help Christians win back the story hour at public libraries, which in recent years has been embroiled in controversies over drag queen book readings. And Kirk Cameron's new book, As You Grow, was published by Brave Books. Now, here's another story from Fox News. A Christian mom sues after 4-year-old was allegedly forced to participate in LGBT Pride March. A Christian mother in the UK is having her case heard in London on Wednesday after she took legal action when her 4-year-old son was allegedly compelled to participate in his school's LGBT Pride March against her will. Izudwa Montague made headlines in 2018 when she claimed the head teacher at Heavers Farm Primary School in Croydon, South London, aggressively informed her that her son was not allowed to opt out of the march despite her family's religious beliefs. Wow, isn't that amazing? A school saying what your kid has to promote. When she made an appointment to discuss the issue at the school, she said the deputy head, who was also the head teacher's daughter, showed up wearing a T-shirt emblazoned with the phrase, "Why be racist, sexist, homophobic, or transphobic when you could just be quiet?" It was shocking, to be honest, Montague told Fox News Digital. With the aid of the London-based Christian Legal Center, Montague sued on the grounds of direct and indirect discrimination, victimization, and breach of statutory duty under the Education Act of 1996 and the Human Rights Act of 1998. Her case is slated to be heard on February 10th. Montague's case is potentially a landmark, one that will be a first-time court in the UK will examine the legal basis of imposing LGBT ideology on primary schools, according to the Christian Legal Center, which noted the issue has also led to tensions between schools and members of the Jewish and Muslim communities in their country. And, this is why I wanted to pause and talk about these particular stories. And that is because, we have to remember that Paul worked within the legal system of Rome. He had been imprisoned and falsely imprisoned. He had been bound and he had even been beaten, which was against Roman law. So he used the law to both protect himself and to advance the opportunity for him to go to Rome and present his case before Caesar Nero. And Paul used the system to his own advantage. And, this is something I think that the church needs to step up on and get in the game. And some of these folks that are giving of their time and efforts and resources to go to court on behalf of churches, Lord bless them for that, because I don't think we're taking advantage of the things that we ought to be doing the way we should, and standing up and saying, hey, we have rights too. And we do, especially here in the United States. We are protected by the Constitution, and as you see there in Great Britain in the story we just read, and we can't just roll over and let them have men dressed as women reading to our kids and normalizing these things, because if you look at um, the churches, the letters to the seven churches in Revelation, in Ephesus, you see that the church was commended by Jesus for hating the deeds of the Nicolaitans, and then later in the letters, those deeds in another church down through the realm, the chronology of church history, these deeds had become doctrine. And you see, that's why we stand up against these things, because when we allow them and they start to creep into our minds, they will become normal, then they will become acceptable, and then they will become what is taught. And this is and defended, as we see, what this the headmaster's daughter at this church did, or school did rather, in wearing such a T-shirt. What an insult to wear something like that to the meeting. But I mean, we obviously we're not called to resort to violence or anything, but we are called to work within the system. And Jesus said, "Hey, render to Caesar's what is Caesar's. Pay your taxes. Operate within the system." Well, we don't just pay our taxes and then not get to use what our tax money went to. We have to work within the system, and I think Christians need to stand up and quit rolling over and playing dead. Our children's lives are at stakes. We need to stand up and let our voices be heard, and bless these two situations where people have stood up. This woman, and then this gentleman in New Mexico. Now, here's another interesting story in a sad sense, and it too comes from the Christian headlines, and that is that 16 million women have left the church in the last 10 years. And throughout the past decade, millions of women had left the church despite considering themselves Christians. Erica Anderson, an author and freelance journalist, recently published her book, Reason to Return: Why Women Need the Church and the Church Needs Women. In the book, she notes that 16 million women have stopped attending church in the last 10 years. And the phrase that I like to use a lot is, the church of your past doesn't have to be the church of your future, Anderson told CBN's Prayer Link in an interview. Despite acknowledging that no church is perfect, Anderson invites women to return to church to rediscover joy and purpose. And after seeing some data about how many women were leaving church and showing that women were leaving church at a much faster rate than men in the past 10 years specifically, I knew there was a message that they needed to hear, because so many of those women, they're not turning away from God, but they do need an invitation back to the faith community, she explained. According to a 2019 study from Pew Research, women have become less religious in the past decade, with the number of women saying they are professing Christians dropping from 80% to 69%, and the number of women identifying as religious nuns increasing, N-O-N-E-S, not N-U-N-S, increasing by 10% since 2009. And according to CBN News, many women left the church amid the hashtag #ChurchToo movement, which revealed dozens of sexual abuse scandals within the church. And by far, the biggest factor propelling women out of the church is sex. The hashtag #ChurchToo movement attested to just how damaging irresponsible handling of the church's messages of sexual purity can be for some women, a recent article in Relevant magazine says. And during the Prayer Link interview, Anderson discussed additional reasons why women have left the church, and one of the number of reasons is overwhelmed, stress, busyness, which you might immediately conclude, oh, maybe it's deconstruction, or maybe it's deconstruction, or maybe it's people deconverting. But the truth is that most women are leaving the church. They are not deconverting. They are not deconstructing. They still value their relationship with God, she explained. Many of them are looking for a little bit of guidance, a friend to walk through life with them. And this, again, just underscores the importance of fellowship. And, whatever the reason and, the failures within the church, the Bible says not to forsake the gathering of ourselves together with other believers. And we need to be together. And, yes, there's some awful people that are in the ministry, and there are churches covering up scandals and things of that nature that ought not to be happening. But, I would just encourage anybody, man or woman, don't stop searching for a body of believers to be a part of. Find a Bible teaching church and someone who is standing behind the podium, who is respectful of the Word of God and calls sin sin and preaches the truth and love. And they're still out there. There's still good churches out there, even in the midst of the mass defection from truth. The Bible predicted would be a part of the last days. But again, this just underscores the need for us to be together. And even thinking back on Jesus with the 12, ministry was obviously sometimes wearying. And there were times reported where the disciples didn't even have time to eat. They were so busy. So Jesus would take them aside. And that would be that time of communion and fellowship, and not communion in taking the elements, but I mean communion, koinonia, fellowship together, and just catching their breath and being family. And these are all important things for the church to do. And sadly, we live in an age where there has been this mass defection from truth, and many churches are not trustworthy places, and many behind the podium. And this is one of the things I think we all need to keep in mind. The calling of the pastor is a sacred one, and there are certain qualifications in 1 Timothy 3 that are listed there. And the husband of one wife, and having his own house in order, and all these other things, and not given to wine, and these other things. You know what? Then those are hard, fast rules. And this is what the Lord said is for the man who has that calling, and the calling is described as a good thing. And listen, people are just flocking to seminary because it's funny. Anytime you sit around with a group of other pastors, or especially lead pastors, everybody wants their job, and wants to have that position, so to speak. And I tell every pastor that we've ever hired or put on staff, that you're about to learn what full-time is, because full-time is 24/7, 365. There's no days off, so to speak. Even if your body is resting, your mind never does, and there's always something to do. And, this is what we're called to, and it's a calling. And there's no sign-ups for it. It's a calling. And, if we would just adhere to these things, the church would be in a much better state. And Fox News reports, and this is another story along the same lines as our previous, the First Baptist Church faces backlash on biblical sexuality pledge for congregants. A Florida Baptist church came under fire for a statement confirming beliefs that marriage is between a man and a woman. The First Baptist Church of Jacksonville was spotlighted on Sunday after local media reports caught wind on the church's biblical sexuality statement set to take effect in March. The First Baptist statement on biblical sexuality, detailing the church's support for binary gender roles, as well as the belief that marriage is only between a man and a woman, was originally approved in October. Those are both biblical mandated truths. I mean, there's two genders. God, the manufacturer, gave a gender list of two. He created them male and female. That is to be every church's position. And biblical sexuality, God, who made us all, has restricted sexual activity to a married man and woman only. And, there are no amendments, and culture doesn't matter. Society's thoughts on the matter don't matter. This is what God said. And kudos to this church for taking that stand. And as a member of the First Baptist Church, I believe God creates people in his image as either male or female, the article says, and that this creation is a fixed matter of human biology, not individual choice. I believe marriage is instituted by God, not government, and it is between one man and one woman, and is the only context for sexual desire and expression, the statement read. According to the church, all members of the congregation are required to sign this statement and return it by March 19th in order to maintain their membership. And backlash grew against the statement in the previous week, leading up to an open mic event at the church to listen to and discuss concerns from audience members. One included a queer woman named Katie who opposed the statement and condemned the church for supporting it. Yesterday, an acquaintance messaged me and told me about this forum. Their family has made the decision to stop attending this church, considering recent events, which is something I encourage all existing congregants to follow. So a queer woman came to this forum and told all of the church members to leave. The decision to have your members sign any form of contract to attend your church into an organization turns your church into an organization or a club, she added. The church is no longer a religious place of worship welcome to all. These sexuality oaths are drawing a clear line in the sand, showing us who you truly welcome, which is by no means all. And Senior Pastor Heath Lambert defended the statement against these allegations, emphasizing that the statement does not solely condemn homosexuality, but all sins regarding sexuality. It is not that we are any less sinful than anybody out there in Jacksonville. It's not that we are any better than anybody who thinks our statement is a joke, Lambert said. It's that we have to come to confess our sin instead of looking at the Bible and rallying against what the Bible has to say about sexual sin. What we're saying is, God, you're right and I'm wrong. Will you please forgive me and then wash me in the blood of Jesus by faith? We're not better, but by faith we are saved. And again, just to see the backlash and this one voice from the LGBT community standing up and telling other people to leave the church, and families actually doing so because the pastor said, we're going to believe the Bible and we're going to stand by it and ask that you do too. And just as far as things can get out of control and bizarre, our last story for our time together today comes from the Gateway Pundit. And the headline reads, the Satanic Temple announces the launch of a clinic to provide religious abortions in New Mexico. The Satanic Temple released a statement following the ruling on their plans to fight in court for the right to religious abortion. The Satanists believe abortion is a religious sacrament. This is child sacrifice, is what they're talking about. On Wednesday, the Satanic Temple announced they will open a religious medical services clinic in New Mexico, and the clinic will provide free religious medication abortion care to women in the state. The Satanic Temple announced the launch of its first reproductive health clinic, and the TST Health, the Satanic Temple's religious medical service arms, will provide telehealth screenings and appointments and prescribe abortion medication for its patients. And according to the TST Health's website, anyone in New Mexico seeking to perform the Satanic Temple's abortion ritual will be able to receive free online medical services, and patients undergo a confidential screening and a virtual appointment before having their prescriptions sent to the clinic's pharmacy partner, who will mail the medication in a discreet package, and the pharmacy's fees will fall around $90 in order to keep prices at a minimum. And again, Satan comes only to steal, to kill, and destroy. And Jesus came that we might have life and have it more abundantly. And I can't think of anything that makes it more clear than our last two stories. God has said, here's the way to live. Here's the best way to live. Here's the most beneficial way to live. Here's how to keep society both productive and also God-honoring. And then here you've got Satan saying, you know what, we'll pay to kill your baby for you. And it is a religious right, and we'll even pay for it, and or at least provide it at a minimal cost. In this world, again, I think we all come to those places where it's like, oh, what next? What else can happen? It can't get any worse, and then it does. And looking at our world today, it all should go back to where we started. The Lord said it'll be perilous in the last days. Men will be lovers of themselves and haters of God. And boy, are we there. But that, again, should take our minds to the glorious appearing, the great expectation, and the glorious appearing of our great God and Savior, Jesus Christ, who is going to appear in the air. We will meet him there with the dead in Christ, and we will forever be with the Lord. Well, that's it for this week, and I hope you were informed and maybe a bit encouraged to keep your eyes on the prize, because life can be overwhelming. But remember, we can be of good cheer, even in the midst of tribulation, because the Lord has overcome this world. And he is coming again, and he's going to rule and reign it, and we're going to be there with him when we return with him at the second coming. But prior to that, and before that, there's going to be the mass removal of Christians from all over the world, from every tribe, tongue, nation, and people, and God is going to keep saving right through the tribulation, when he rescues from death, second death, that is, a multitude of people that no man could number from that same grouping, every tribe, tongue, nation, and people. And then Jesus is going to come back and end that tribulation period, where out of his mouth goes a sharp sword, and with it he strikes the nations. And then there's going to be truly peace on earth for 1,000 years, with Satan bound and Jesus ruling and reigning in righteousness with a rod of iron, from the throne of David, the throne of human government, in the fourth temple in Jerusalem during the millennium. So we've got a lot to look forward to and not be overwhelmed by the moment. So that's it for the day, and today, and thank you for joining in. And please pardon again my interruptions there with the yawns. I don't know when this is going to stop, hopefully soon, but anyway, Lord bless you all. Again, thank you, and we covet your continued prayers. And again, I mentioned earlier on the little blip about tonight's program. Hey, if 4 or 5 minutes, go watch something I did yesterday called The Heart of Worship. It's on YouTube and Facebook. And just a reminder, the world will know we are his disciples by the love we have for one another. And all this bickering and fighting over what true worship is, or that kind of music isn't worship, this kind of music isn't worship, and all that's got to go away. And I make a case for that in this little short video. So give it a watch, and I think you'll be encouraged. Well, that's it for me, and we'll see you next week, or we'll see you here, there, or let's hope in the air. God bless you.